Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the summer series. My name is Andrew Valinas, and I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Renewable Energy Association. Before we begin, I just want to recognize our sponsors, Clearwater Credit Union, Kaufman Engineers, Montana Energy Office at DEQ, Onsite Energy, Aero, and Ford Montana Foundation. I'd also like him to introduce my organization really quick. The Montana Renewable Energy Association is a nonprofit organization that works statewide to advocate and educate for renewable energy. We hope you will check out our website to learn more about us. Today's presentation is about renewable energy and transportation, and I'm really excited to have two exceptional guest speakers joining us today, Kyla Maki with the Energy Office and Vince Caristo with Mountain Line Public Transportation in Missoula. And I will leave the introductions as brief as that, and we'll dive right into the content because we just have some really great presentations today that I want to make sure we have plenty of time for. So give me a second here as I transfer control over to Kyla so that we can begin the presentation. Pardon me. Need to unmute Kyla. There we go. Kyla, can you test your audio?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm going to go on mute and you can take it away.
Great. Well, thanks, Andrew, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk about renewable energy and transportation. I am with the Energy Office at DEQ. My focus area is electric vehicles, transportation, as well as some policy and energy planning. So with that, the focus of the conversation today will really be how renewable energy, particularly solar PV, can be paired with electric vehicles to both reduce emissions as well as costs. So hopefully it will give you a little bit insight into how these two technologies can work together to make transportation more clean and more affordable as well. So just a little bit of an outline for the discussion today. I'll first go over emissions from the transportation sector and why electric vehicles are important. Also comparing electric vehicle and gas vehicle carbon emissions. Are electric vehicles really clean is a question that often comes up. Electric vehicle energy use compared to other household appliances, how does it stack up? Some options for powering electric vehicles with renewable energy directly and indirectly, as well as considerations for charging different vehicle types at different locations. So this can be residential applications, commercial light-duty vehicles, as well as commercial heavy-duty vehicles. What are things to consider if you're looking at pairing renewable technology and electric vehicles? And then also we'll discuss the important topic of why when you charge your electric vehicles is really important for cost as well as emissions. And then I'll end with an example specifically of some analysis that the National Renewable Energy Lab worked with our office and other partners on analyzing electric transit buses in Missoula and how those could be paired with renewable energy. So first, just looking at the transportation sector and its carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. They've been increasing for over the last decade, of course, as population has increased. But what's notable is that in 2016, transportation emissions, so that's that green line, exceeded the power sector, so electric generation sector emissions, and have been increasing and have been the largest contributor of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States since 2016. And a lot of this is due to population growth, increase in vehicle miles traveled, as well as more trucks on the road as gas prices are lower. The other piece of this is why the decline in the power sector, electricity generation sector emissions, and a lot of that's due to more renewable energy coming online, replacing high carbon-based fuels such as coal in most regions of the country. So this is an important consideration as we think about why electric vehicles are important moving forward in reducing emissions across the country. Oops. Yep. So one question, again, that often comes up is, are electric vehicles really clean when compared to gas vehicles? And the answer really is, to some extent, in most regions of the country, yes, but it does depend on where you're charging the vehicle because of the different power grids or regions of the country where there's different fuel mixes. So if you look in our region, which is circled there in red, it's the Northwest Power Pool. That's what most of Montana is. In the far eastern part of the state is actually in that Midwestern portion, the MROW. But in the Northwest Power Pool, so most of Montana, this comparison of what a gas-powered vehicle would need to get in terms of fuel economy in order to have the equivalent emissions as an electric vehicle. So for our region, a gas-powered vehicle would need to get 102 miles per gallon in order to have the equivalent emissions compared to an electric vehicle. Clearly, there's no gas-powered vehicle that can get that fuel economy. If you look at different parts of the country, so more Midwestern, and you can see that a vehicle comparatively would need to get 40 miles per gallon. There's a lot of hybrid vehicles that can get that. And so in some parts of the country, it may, at least at this point in time, be cleaner to drive a hybrid vehicle. But you can see there on the bottom right, it says average for the United States, 88 miles per gallon. So the majority of the country, an electric vehicle is cleaner. And then looking more specifically on a utility by utility basis to compare kind of the well-to-wheel electric vehicle emissions is another way to look at this and how clean the vehicles are. And so you'll see that when you're considering, say, a Chevy Bolt, which is an all-electric vehicle, charging on different power grids with different resource mixes. So you have 100% coal, 50% coal, 50% gas, or 100% gas combined cycle, 50% gas, 50% non-carbon. You can see that the CO2 emissions in pounds per mile changes depending on the resource mix. And then you look at Northwestern Energy's resource mix. So that's the majority of Montana is on Northwestern Energy's system. And if you're charging your electric vehicle, you would know that their resource mix is about 58% carbon free. So it would probably be between that 50% gas, 50% non-carbon, and maybe the 50% coal, 50% gas number. So it'd be a little bit higher than that 50% gas, 50% non-carbon in terms of pounds per CO2 pounds per mile. So it does really, this just demonstrates it depends on what utility you're using to charge the vehicle, who your service provider is in different parts of the country, and what the fuel mix is going to really make a difference in terms of how clean the vehicle is from a well-to-wheel emissions perspective. So getting into some terms for electric vehicle charging stations that are used to understand a little bit more background. There's basically 3 levels of charging: level 1, level 2, and level 3. They vary by the power level, the time it takes to charge a typical electric vehicle, although every vehicle is different depending on their battery capacity, whether it's a plug-in hybrid, whether it's an all-electric vehicle. But these are the different levels, and level 1 and level 2 are both on AC. Level 3 is going to be your DC fast charging stations that can charge vehicles very quickly. The charging time, you can see, varies significantly. The lower the level, the longer it's going to take to charge your vehicle. But there's several applications for level 1 and especially level 2, like a workplace situation where your vehicle is parked for hours at a time and it makes sense. And then the cost per unit, of course, is going to vary greatly depending on the level of charging that you're getting. So for level 1 and level 2, level 1 is just your typical 120 volt. Just can plug in your vehicle that way, charge overnight at your household, and that may make sense for most people. You can also put a level 2 at home. Level 2 works great for workplace or commercial charging as well. So comparing how much electricity that an electric vehicle uses compared to other household appliances, it's often a question when considering, say if you want to combine your electric vehicle and pair it with, if you have solar panels, it's good to consider how much electricity on average it's going to use at its peak, especially. And so you can see that a level 1, and PEV just stands for plug-in electric vehicle. You can see that uses about the same as a microwave or a dishwasher. And then there's different options for level 2 charging, and most vehicles can charge at different levels. You can program to charge at lower levels, depending on what you're trying to, if you're trying to keep costs lower or avoid kind of peak times of usage, then you can charge at a lower level. So for the 3.3 kilowatt level 2 charger, that's going to use a little less than your clothes dryer at your house. And then as you go higher, clearly you're using, with a level 2 19.2 kW, probably wouldn't need that level for a household. You'd probably be at the 3.3 to 6.6. And in that case, you're just using about the same as maybe an air conditioner, a little more than your, average clothes dryer. So there, as I mentioned briefly, there are kind of 3 ways that you can essentially power your electric vehicle with renewable energy. And some of this is just accounting for the increase in electricity use and, purchasing renewable energy credits, which are just associated with renewable energy generation, or, as most people think about it, directly charging your electric vehicle with renewable energy. And so this direct charging is demonstrating that, that's putting a solar panel, say, on your roof if you're at a household, and combining it with storage so that you're, when you're generating electricity during the day, it's storing it so that when you come home and plug in your vehicle, you can guarantee that, that vehicle is being powered just by renewable energy. You may be using some power from the grid in the evening, but mostly you will be able to guarantee that you're charging your electric vehicle with solar energy, and storage plays a really important role there. But of course, that impacts costs. And so one of the things that, another option is this indirect charging, which that is, the solar array could be located on site, it could be located off site, but where storage isn't really involved and you are having to use some power from the grid in the evening. And so then then your electricity would depend on whatever fuel mix is on the grid at that point in time. This could be like a community solar type option where you're accounting for the renewable energy on more of an annual basis than you are, say in the direct charging, which is direct time of day usage. So there's just different options here, and it just depends on, how feasible direct charging is at the location you're at. Residential applications, it can be more feasible, but as you get to larger vehicles or different locations where it's not feasible, the indirect charging. And then finally, there's, very much just an accounting mechanism, but you can have a rec purchasing only program where you're accounting for the, vehicle's annual energy and then you would purchase renewable energy credits or RECs associated that associated with renewable energy generation that is likely not on site and may be located even in a different state in some circumstances, where you're just trying to account for the electricity use on an annual basis and purchase renewable energy credits to back that up. So one example of that is the TriMet, which is a transit agency in Portland, Oregon. They have wind-powered buses, but they really are purchasing wind power through a REC program, and then that's accommodating the amount of electricity those buses are using on an annual basis. So kind of different ways to think about it. It's important though, because direct charging isn't the only way to kind of ensure that your vehicles to some extent being charged by renewable energy. So the other key consideration with electric vehicles and renewable energy is kind of what application they'll be used for. So there's residential, commercial light duty, and commercial heavy duty, and very different ways to think about renewable energy and applications for it in each of these situations. So considerations for renewable energy charging at a residential location is that, direct charging is possible, as I mentioned. Solar, of course, is usually more feasible than wind. And then, how much, one of the questions that comes up is how much larger should the solar array be? And that's going to depend on your battery size. Most EV batteries for an all-electric vehicle, like the Chevy Bolt, range from 40 kilowatt hours to 100 kilowatt hours. Most Teslas have a longer range in miles, so they're larger, closer to the 100 kilowatt hour range. The efficiency of the vehicle, and that's really important, is how many kilowatt hours per mile. Most EVs range from the 2 to 4 kilowatt hour per mile efficiency. And then, how many miles are you driving per year? So I just used an average for this calculation of somebody who drives 12,000 miles a year on the battery that's 25 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. That would equal an electricity usage of 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. And I think in Montana, the average number of additional solar panels you would need to accommodate that vehicle is between 7 and 9. But you can do those calculations depending on what your use and what your vehicle is. It's also important to consider, and I think one of the most important considerations is when you charge does really matter when it comes to costs and emissions. So the top left and the bottom left graph here demonstrate why that's important. So you can see there's kind of 2 on-peak periods. This is over the course of the day, and it's demonstrating electricity use over the course of the day on a grid this is in California. And so you can see that there's a peak at 8 o'clock in the morning when people are just getting to work. And then there's a peak sort of towards the end of the day when people are coming home and turning on appliances, things like that. So those 2 peak periods, without people managing their charging, and so not controlling when they charge, which typically means people will come home at the end of the day, or come right to work and plug in if there's workplace charging. So you can see that without kind of controlling their charging and just plugging in when they get to work, plugging in when they get home, the peaks, and you'll see on the bottom left graph, associated with the charging of the electric vehicles coincide with the peaks of the grid. And this means that there's more, it adds to the peaks, it makes it steeper, and that's going to cost more. And eventually everybody will pay for that because the utility is going to have to increase generation to accommodate those peaks. Why it's also why it's also important is that if you look at that graph on the right, that's just showing CO2 intensity over the course of a day. And so that gray shaded area is the CO2 intensity of the grid. And the different colored lines represent different types of charging. So you have your workplace charging, which is level 2 in the green dashed line. And that kind of shows you that, when folks get to work, they're charging, and then right before they go home or when they come home. And then the red dashed line there is important too, because that demonstrates if you control the charging and are able to manage it, you can really avoid those peaks. And if you're charging, say between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., you're really avoiding those peaks when it comes not only to electricity use, but also the intensity of carbon on the grid. So some considerations for commercial light duty vehicles. What is the use case? Fleet, workplace, shared ride service, Uber or Lyft. So use case meaning, are you going to be using it for fleets or at a workplace, shared ride services? That impacts what level of charging we'll need, and it determines how many vehicles we'll need to charge. Does my business, organization, or city have renewable energy goals? That's an important consideration. If it's something where they have goals and you want to demonstrate you're using renewable energy, you may do like this picture shows, which is at Google's campus, and have solar covering a parking structure. When can the vehicles be charged? Can they be charged in the middle of the day to take advantage of solar production? That's an important consideration. Or do they need to charge at night where, we may need to use some of the energy from the grid? Is on-site solar possible based on the number of electric vehicles? Is it possible to put solar at the location? And demand charges is, not to get too much into the weeds on that, and I won't, but demand charges essentially charge, and they are assessed usually at commercial locations where you're getting charged for your highest energy use throughout the day. So solar may help reduce those demand charges if you can charge in the middle of the day. Some considerations for medium or heavy duty vehicles. So this would be like transit buses or school buses, garbage trucks, delivery trucks. Again, how many vehicles will be charging? Do I have a fleet of them? What's their electricity uses? When can they be charged? Do they need to charge at night? Do I need to, use them on routes during the day? Can I charge them in the middle of the day, such as like a school bus? And then what is the existing energy load at the location before adding electric vehicles? So that's important when it comes to cost and assessing additional costs for the electric vehicles. And is on-site renewable energy feasible? Typically with this use case, to get 100% of the power from renewable energy, it's not really feasible. And then again, what are the demand charges? And so can we reduce those in some way? Is there a way to work with the utility maybe to reduce those, maybe be on more of a time of use rate, which assesses costs based on the time you're using the electricity, not just an overall demand charge which can be independent of time, as is the case with Northwestern's. So I'll just end quickly with this case study that National Renewable Energy Lab did some analysis for us and Mountain Line on their 6 electric transit buses before Mountain Line got them in, and Vince will talk more about this, but essentially that we're looking at what was an optimal solar system to accommodate charging these buses, and what were sort of the trade-offs in terms of costs, as well as renewable energy production or carbon-free electricity to power these buses. And the important pieces of this are just that the economically optimal system chose the system that was 50 kW, so that's no coincidence, that's the net metering limit here in Montana. But only 61% of the energy was carbon free, and the rest was not. And then we looked at no net metering limit. You would need so a system that didn't think about the limit, that would be a $1.4 million system. You need 712 kilowatt size system to accommodate those 6 electric buses. Clearly could be pretty cost prohibitive. And then we looked at, if storage were cheaper, what would that mean? And could we get more renewable energy and account for that if storage were cheaper? And so that's that bottom there that's showing that 77%, you'd get to 77% carbon-free electricity powering those buses. You'd have a 325 kilowatt PV, and then a storage system associated with that. So those are the kind of takeaways from that. And there are some demand charge savings if you combine that with solar, but I'm already run a little bit over, so I'll let Vince Vince go ahead and we'll take questions at the end.
Vince, you should be good to go.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So my name is Vince Caristo. I'm the Projects and Planning Manager at Mountain Line here in Missoula. We are the largest public transit provider in Montana. We cover an area of about 70 square miles, the city of Missoula and a portion of the surrounding county. We provide, before coronavirus, over 1.5 million rides a year. Those numbers are down about 60% and rising slowly every week. I think it'll be a long time till we get back to our pre-COVID numbers. But we have a pretty significant operation for a town the size of Missoula. We've got 75 employees. We run 12 fixed route buses, which I'll talk about mostly here today, and as well as paratransit service for people with disabilities. And our fixed route buses, we have 30 29 to 35 foot long buses that until recently were all running on diesel. And transit buses as well as school buses are traditionally some of the more polluting vehicles on the road. There have been a lot of advances in the last 15 years that have made those engines burn a lot cleaner. But on the whole, our contribution to air quality in the valley, depending on our ridership, it was significant. We're putting out a lot of pollutants on our buses on the road. Of course, if overall the riding public transit reduces your pollution from an individual level compared to driving a car, for example. But our agency, back in at least in 2014, it predates my time at Mountain Line, but in 2014, our board of directors passed a resolution asking staff to move our agency towards a clean fuel path for our fixed route buses, recognizing the effects of burning so much diesel every year. I think mostly this was done as a recognition of the persistent air quality issues we have here in the Missoula Valley, which I'm sure are shared by a lot of you across the state, with our combination of winter inversions and summer wildfires, as well as wildfire smoke from around North America, perhaps the world. But also, this was a resolution that was made in recognition of our community's environmental and sustainability goals, of which we wanted to play a part. And so in 2018, we were successful in winning a couple of major grants that would allowed us to purchase our first 6 battery electric buses from a company named Proterra, who's based out of California. And so we purchased 6 battery electric buses that were delivered almost exactly a year ago today, about this week, as well as 7 chargers to go with those 6 buses. Just briefly, we learned a lot through the process of procuring the buses, building the buses up, looking at all the different options for charging equipment and upgrading our facility to accept the charging equipment. So we learned a lot. It took about almost 2 years from start to finish. This is, the bus industry is kind of unique. I was surprised to learn when I entered it that you don't just order a bus off of a list. Every bus in the country is custom built to the agency. So that took a long time, I think. But if any of you are, running fleets or have an institutional use for electrification, I think, the process will take some time. So since our buses were delivered in August of last year, we've been monitoring their performance really closely. We have what's called smart meters that are electric meters on our side of the meter that track in very fine detail all of the energy that's used by every one of the 7 chargers that we have at our base. And the graphic here is just an image that shows our total kilowatt hours used, as well as our peak energy usage at over a period of about 9 months. just to show the level of detail that we have available to us. We're tracking things like energy consumption by comparing energy consumption along each of our routes, looking at our overall fuel economy, looking at relationships between energy consumption and temperature, which I'll talk about a little bit more here as well as issues of availability and maintenance issues, which is not really specific to electric buses, but it's something that we do with all of our new bus procurements. And so we've got a lot of data sources we're combining to monitor our performance because this is essentially a pilot project for not just Mountain Line, but for the state of Montana. Because we are one of the first transit agencies in a really cold weather environment here in Montana to operate battery electric buses. There's another agency in Duluth, Minnesota, who put buses on the road about 6 months before us, and slightly different style of bus and slightly different conditions in their community compared to ours. But electric buses, I mean, first I'll say, they are not quite, at least for us here in Montana, a one-to-one replacement for our diesel buses. First of all, they add additional complexity in our bus barn. We've got a pretty large facility here in Missoula where we park 16 or so buses indoors every night. And our electric buses needed a place to charge, so they need a specific spot in that barn where they can be charged, and that adds complexity to our operation that we've been able to work with. But that was the first thing that we recognized was different in operating these buses. Another thing that's different is that we have our efficiency, so our miles per kilowatt hour fluctuates pretty significantly based on temperature, ambient temperature outside. So this is a graph that shows fuel economy and temperature over the first 3 or 4 months of our operation. So we're seeing on the coldest days in the winter, we're seeing reductions of up to 50% in range. And this is something that transit operators are keenly aware of. It might be something that's, less, I think for personal use, it might be use. Most likely we'll see the same effect. I don't know if Kyla potentially has information on that, but it's not something that really that I've seen discussed as much. It might not be as significant to an individual consumer, but for us as a transit agency, what this has meant is that in the wintertime, we can't have our bus go out in the morning and run a full day of service and plan to have it come back 12 hours later. So starting in about November, we instituted a separate blocking schedule and routing schedule for our buses that involve heating up the buses in the morning before they go out, which we call cabin preconditioning, and then coming back in the middle of the day after 3 or 4 hours to charge. And so that adds a lot of complexity to what we do. It's not something as we're looking at a full fleet conversion for our agency. It's really not something that we could do with all 30 of our buses. But it's worked well for the first year. We have used our buses a lot. We've gone over almost 65,000 total miles with our 6 buses in this first year. I recognize this graph unintentionally is revealing the effects of coronavirus more than anything. So oddly enough, in the months of March and April, we had to park our electric buses for the most part because we have at our agency, like a lot of institutional customers, we purchase oil on a prepaid basis for the following year. So we had committed to a delivery of a certain number of gallons of oil every month. And because we had to reduce our service dramatically because of coronavirus, we weren't using oil at nearly the same rate as we used to. So we weren't going to have a place to put the diesel fuel. So we grounded our electric buses for 2 months so we could honor that oil contract, which is a strange situation. A few slides here about our experience, mostly about the cost of electricity compared to diesel. So I think Kyla alluded a bit to managed charging, or what some people call smart charging. which is essentially, an algorithm or computerized system that can spread out your charging that you have to do for a single vehicle, or in our case, a number of vehicles, over a longer period of time, so that you reduce the peak amount of energy that you use at your facility, which has a big impact on cost. Now, we don't have smart charging with these 6 initial buses, and we really pay for it. So the result is that about half of our cost for electricity goes to demand charges, which is what you pay for your highest amount, the charge you pay to Northwestern Energy based on your highest energy usage in a 15-minute period in the month. And so overall, the unit cost of the energy to charge our buses is about twice the cost of what we pay otherwise here at Mountain Line to charge our building. And the cost per mile compared to diesel, now granted this is based on extremely low sub $2 a gallon diesel costs, but it's what we have today. It's almost double on a per mile cost. So it's a lot more costly. Now granted, we don't have right now, we just have a standard institutional customer rate with Northwestern. So we're paying standard rates that are probably familiar to and similar to a lot of the rates that you would pay across the state. And so that's the situation we have now. So in terms of renewable energy, Kyla talked a bit about this, looking at the source of where energy comes from to evaluate whether or not, how much emissions benefit electric vehicles do provide. And so what we found through the same group that Kyla mentioned with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, they helped complete an analysis for us that actually looked at using that energy mix here in Montana and comparing the emissions rates of common pollutants for a diesel bus to battery electric buses. What we found was pretty surprising in that, we expected to see reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, but because of the amount of coal that's used in the Northwestern energy mix, we actually saw an increase in sulfur oxide emissions for battery electric buses compared to diesel. There was a decrease in nitrogen oxides as well, but that was an interesting conclusion, and certainly empowers the case for pushing Northwestern Energy to increase the renewable mix even further and reduce their coal usage. Another thing that we looked at with the NREL project, as Kyla talked about, was looking at this, trying to quantify how solar and battery storage might be used to reduce demand charges for our agency. And it was really interesting analysis. I mean, essentially what they found was that, any investment in solar energy does have a return on investment over a 20-year period. Not a very big one, essentially breaking even over a 20-year period. But that's based on, today's cost of storage and today's limits on metering and all those things. So the take home for us was that, we need to track as an agency these costs of solar and storage, because, if investments in those things, we could break even today with the direction and hopefully the trends in technology in 5-10 years, it might be something that could be really valuable for us as we increase our energy usage. One of the things we're keeping our eye on is that in around 2027, after our 6 buses have been in service for about 8 years, their battery packs we expect will need replacement. So this is uncharted territory for transit agencies around the country. There haven't been battery electric buses in service long enough to meet this point, but we're expecting to have to replace those battery packs as their efficiency and capacity goes down, just like all of our cell phones reduce in effectiveness over time. These batteries work the same way. And so we'll have an opportunity with those 6 battery packs to potentially do something with them. We could, potentially use them to help in combination with solar energy, much in the way I think Kyla mentioned it, as direct usage of solar energy to directly power our buses. If we could charge our buses while they're on their route at our downtown transfer station for small units of time, that could help actually extend the useful life of our buses and potentially use those battery packs even longer. We could also, people, and we've talked with Northwestern Energy a little bit about this, about creating some kind of battery bank with those 6 battery packs. It's a lot of kilowatt hours of energy we'd have available to us that we could charge during the day and use to reduce demand charges when we are charging our buses overnight. And of course, we are thankfully in talks with Northwestern Energy right now, thanks in large part to the help of Kyla, on evaluating our demand charges. We charge largely our buses overnight. If you recall Kyla's slides, it's not a time when many other people are using energy. There aren't many stresses on the power delivery system. So there's an argument to be made that those demand charges for us overnight could potentially be reduced. And furthermore, it would be valuable to us to understand more precisely when renewable energy sources are being used by Northwestern Energy. Potentially, for example, wind energy might be more prevalent at night, which potentially we could align our usage with when renewable production is at its highest to somehow draw a better connection between renewable energy and the powering of our buses. Where we're going, our board this past year, after 6 months or so of running our battery electric buses, it really proved the concept that we can use these buses in a really difficult use case like a public transit operator, and they can work for us. They're a little bit more expensive now, but we expect those costs to go down in the future. So our board committed to a completely zero emission, tailpipe emission fleet for our vehicles by 2035. And that includes not just our 30 fixed route vehicles, but all the service vehicles and paratransit vehicles we have as well. And we were lucky enough this past spring to win a major grant from the Federal Transit Administration, as well as an additional grant from the DEQ and Kyla's organization. And we have 6 additional buses coming to us in the next few years. So by the end of 2022, we expect to have about a 40% electric fixed route fleet. So yeah, with that, I'll close it and I'll open up for questions, I guess, for both of us if we've got time here.
Yeah, just a reminder for folks, you can submit questions using the chat function. So please go ahead and submit those, and we will go ahead and I will facilitate a Q&A. So first of all, thank you again, Kyla and Vince, for being with us today and for presenting. First question, maybe I'll direct towards Kyla. Have there been major shifts in the duck curve because of stay-at-home orders and more people working from home? How has that affected demand charges, particularly maybe for electric vehicles and charging throughout the day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't seen any specific studies on that. I imagine if there were going to be, they'd be out of California, where they have where the duck curve, and so for people who don't know, the duck curve is essentially where they're in the middle of the day, as I understand it, the energy use is lower, solar production is high, and then there's this huge ramp up in energy use at the end of the day, and there's not generation to support that, so there needs would need essentially in that case to be more generation to build to accommodate that. As far as COVID goes, I think that could impact that energy use and dip in the middle of the day to where it's shifting more. Maybe it's shifting more than increasing or decreasing to residential versus commercial or kind of workplace energy use. And I think that's something that at this point, with people working from home, they do have the ability to charge their vehicle in the middle of the day. And so if you've got solar panels and, are sitting at home working, you can be charging and know that, that solar production is accommodating that. So it'll be interesting to see if any kind of new studies, I imagine there will be, coming out in terms of how electricity use has shifted during COVID, and how might that change moving forward, or is it temporary?
Great, thanks, Kyla. Yeah, I know that's been a big question for utilities, especially just in general. People are wondering how staying at home has affected energy use, and especially the closure of big commercial businesses as well. Let's see, the next question here. This one's for Vince. Vince, somebody's interested in how Missoulians have reacted to having the EV buses.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. They've been extremely popular. We made a big deal with our debut, with involving our city council members and community leaders on a ride around with the electric buses. There was a lot of enthusiasm to start. We had a request from one person on city council to have a separate marker on our mobile app for transit so that her kids could find the electric bus, because they really wanted to use the electric bus. And I don't think they were alone. But we actually did a survey for an unrelated project. We sometimes do surveys, public opinion surveys, for lack of a better word. And we found that electric buses were one of the most popular things that we do. It was right behind our zero fare program, which provides, we provide our services at no cost to riders. So it's really popular, and I think, we continue to leverage that and let people know, sort of use it as an educational opportunity for the community on what we're doing. I think in a couple weeks, we're about to launch a summer concert series in coordination with a few agencies in town here, where we have local artists who'll be performing on our electric buses, and they'll be live streaming that to the community. So yeah, very popular.
Thanks for that, Vince. As someone based in Missoula, I look forward to seeing the bus live concerts. That'll be really interesting. Let's see, next question here. I guess maybe for Kyla, and I might actually jump in and maybe touch on this one a little bit too. The question is, does Northwestern Energy vary electricity prices over 24 hours? If not, it seems that storage would be useful for demand charges, but not for residential customers who don't have demand charges, which I think is a fair point and really touches on rate design. And we don't have varying rates, at least residential customers don't. So it certainly changes the economics, but could you talk about that a little bit, Kyla? I think it's still, storage is obviously still useful, especially for overnight charging, right? If you're pairing it with solar.
Yeah, I mean, where it comes into play, yeah, storage isn't going to help you as much as a residential customer from, a demand charge perspective, but it can help if you're, trying to store the solar energy during the day and you're not using it. And you can't be home to charge your vehicle if you're not working from home. So it can be useful from, a pure kind of emissions or renewable energy, but yeah, without demand charges, it's not going to help you from that standpoint. The other thing is, so Northwestern, even with their demand charge for commercial customers, it is considered non-coincident. So it doesn't coincide with, your demand charge does not coincide with the utility's peak. So it just is based on your individual customer's highest usage. So that can be challenging too when it comes to, like in Vince's case, like he showed, if they charge overnight, they're still getting hit with a demand charge that's fairly high. So it's not really associated with the system peak. It's just trying to assess the additional, transmission distribution charges on a per kilowatt basis that the utility does. But some utilities do it by, coinciding with their peak, and that seems to send a little better price signal for when entities should be charging.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kyla. And of course, nothing is to say, right now, I think specific tariffs and rate structures for electric vehicles isn't prolific across the US, but there's certainly nothing to say that that won't happen in the future. And will certainly be a big deal when it does. Well, this next question I'll pass to Vince. Vince, is there any data on the overall operating costs of the electric buses in Missoula versus traditional carbon-powered buses, considering that electric vehicles have fewer moving parts and, potentially, maybe hopefully, a reduced cost of maintenance? Vince, you're muted. Hold on a second. Let me unmute you again. Okay.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so that's certainly the hope that we will see over the life cycle of our bus, which will be between 12 to 15 years, that we'll see an overall reduction in maintenance costs. But as of yet, we can't really evaluate that. First of all, this is a new bus, right? So the first few years of operation don't really give us an indication of what we'll see over the lifespan of the bus. In theory, I think the questioner was correct. We understand there's fewer moving parts in the engine component of the bus, and certainly the manufacturers promote a lower overall maintenance cost for the battery electric buses. I believe some of this was based on actual research that was done in the transit industry. But yeah, as of yet, we haven't seen, or we can't evaluate actually the maintenance cost that we'll see, but we expect and hope to see an overall reduction in maintenance costs.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vince. And I can see the person who asked the question and would invite them to email me. I think we can share some of those studies, maybe, and Vince, maybe I can get some of those from you too, and we can pass those along. There's one more question, which I think is a great one to end on, especially because we're well past our 30-minute goal, coming up on an hour, but it's been a great presentation and a great set of questions here. I'd love to have Kyla and Vince, I'd love to have you both maybe address this one. Is there any advice to citizens of other Montana cities on how to encourage their own transit departments to convert to electric transit buses? Kyla, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll let Vince answer as well.
Yeah, I can do my my best on that. Yeah, I think that some of the analysis we did, we worked with through this National Renewable Energy Lab project. We worked with 3 different communities, so Missoula, Whitefish, and Bozeman, and we kind of analyzed different things for each community. But I think the takeaways from our work with those communities and discussions with transit agencies in each of those communities is, every community is going to be at a different place when it comes to their ability to adopt the, electric bus technology. Overall, I think there's a case to be made for the significant amount of emission reductions. Battery electric buses, operationally they cost less, but yes, there is an upfront cost. There's different kind of financing models that could be available. You can lease the batteries to help dampen some of that cost, but they're very different technology than diesel buses, so it would take some getting used to. But I think just demonstrating some of those economic, environmental benefits, sustainability benefits, and that's one of the things we worked with each of these communities. They had all adopted some sort of sustainability or climate plan to address emissions, and that was really kind of the foot in the door. So I think the case is being made. Mountain Line is definitely leading the way in Montana. They'll have some data and be able to demonstrate their success with their buses, and that hopefully will be echoed in other communities and used by other communities. So that's that's the best kind of advice I have at this point, demonstrating some of those benefits using real scenarios like Mountain Line and as spokespeople, and just as costs come down, there'll be more of a case to be made.
Yeah, I would say I think the strongest case for a transit agency to move towards electric vehicles or other zero emission vehicles is to convey to the agency, whether the staff or the board, make sure that they understand that they play a big part in their community's air quality future and contributions to environmental and sustainability goals that their city, county, or region may be working earnestly towards. So the transit agency should really see themselves as a key player in all those aspects of community life. And if they want to move towards electric vehicles, if there's a desire in the community among the transit agency, they should know that there's a really good chance that the technology is there today for them to do it. It's not in research phase. There's proven technology. There are hundreds, maybe thousands at this point, electric buses on the road in America and across Montana. So the technology is there. We, in particular at Mountain Line, we run our buses pretty hard. If you aren't expecting to get a 12-hour day out of your bus uninterrupted, there's a very good chance that the buses that you purchase today, a battery electric bus, could be a one-to-one replacement for what you do. So I'd say the technology's there. You can make a big difference, and that is probably the best you could do.
Great. Well, thank you, Vince and Kyla, again so much, both for sharing your knowledge and your expertise, for being with us today, and especially for staying on later than we had planned in order to discuss some of these questions. Really appreciate you two joining us. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off today. I just want to give another big thank you to our sponsors and remind everyone about our next presentation coming up on Thursday, August 20th, 1 week from today. We're going to have two speakers from Glacier and Yellowstone National Park talking about renewable energy projects that have been installed in two of Montana's favorite national parks. So thank you again, Vince and Kyla, and I hope everyone has a great weekend and that you'll be able to join us next week.